Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom, when we talk a little bit about religion and philosophy and how these things impact the world today. This week, we have been looking at the question, what have we learned from religion? Because people have been doing religion for a very long time. Yesterday, I talked about the idea of anthropomorphizing gods. Reza Aslan was the scholar I was talking about yesterday, who specifically deals with monotheisms and the idea of what monotheisms do to the human mind and how we give the gods that we create in our minds, very human characteristics, and how this can become an extremely dangerous thing to do. So today I want to look at another way of seeing the holy or the sacred or the gods, and that is animism. Animism is a term that was invented by Christian anthropologists. It's very important to remember that many of the ideas that we have are specifically coming out of Western European and U.S. Interpretations of things, and that those interpretations are very often saying, okay, here's Christianity, that's the epitome of religion, and then let's look at these others who aren't quite up to that level. And we are trying in anthropology to get away from that these days, but it still has some implications for how we tend to look at things. So we have to remember that animism is a term invented by Christian anthropologists, but it describes how it appears most of humanity has viewed the idea of some kind of divinity or sacredness to the world outside. And so it's very important. It's probably the oldest way that people have thought about this idea of religion. The racist premise was that animism existed in primitive societies, not yet monotheistic. And that's important to remember, that the early anthropologists of the Western world, looking at tribal ways of seeing things, native ways of seeing things, we're saying, wow, here we are at the pinnacle of human understanding, and look at how those people do it. That isn't that primitive, but of course they will eventually see the light and become Christians too, and then everybody will be happy. No, that's not the way it was going to work out, but that is the way, if you read 19th century anthropology, you definitely see that kind of attitude and idea, and it still permeates a lot of people's thinking about non-monotheistic traditions. So no, it isn't actually primitive, and no, animists are not actually looking to be converted to monotheism necessarily. One of the most damaging false analogies of the early understandings of animism in the Western world was the false analogy with the Christian doctrine of a soul, thinking that animists were saying everything has a soul. This is not what animism is about, because soul is a Western invention. It is an idea that comes out of Egyptian and Greek thought that has nothing to do with most of the ways people think about the holy or the sacred or what's outside. But an interesting and funny thing happened as anthropologists were looking at this idea of animism, and that is that Native American leaders adopted the term new animism. And they started calling the way Western scholars were doing it the old animism. So the new animism, they were saying, is, yeah, that's actually the way we do think of these things. This is an Ojibwe family, and it was the Ojibwe who, in research with instead of on the Ojibwe, that began to lead to this newer understanding. Ojibwe elders found that the language distinction was actually human people, rock people, tree people, and that kind of thing. Everything is people. It's a conceptual difference that's a little bit hard to grasp maybe at first, but so animists do not see the other, the big other out there as also having a soul, but rather as the same thing as human beings. There are human people, rock people, tree people, bear people, wolf people, etc. Rock people, etc. So that's the idea that the Ojibwe began to talk about, and this informs the new animism and a newer way of understanding what animists are actually talking about. As this has gone forward, Western philosophers and anthropologists have begun looking at this newer idea. One important book in this is from 2012, Bruno Latour, an inquiry into modes of existence, an anthropology of the moderns. And notice how Bruno Latour is turning it around. I'm going to look at modern people and consider them like the anthropologists have been considering tribal peoples. And let's see what that reveals, said Bruno Latour. Well, Bruno Latour, 1947, and he's still very much alive and still writing books, said this: "We have never been modern. It is an absolute fallacy to think that the human mind has ever stopped being exactly what the human mind has always been." And he claims that animism is about turning an object into a subject. So he's going to drop all of that idea of a soul and say, what we do kind of naturally as humans is turn objects into subjects. So, for example, 42% of Americans name their cars, and 30% of Americans, about a third, are on a first name basis with their car. Why? Because we are turning an object, a piece of metal and tin and plastic, into a subject, right? We are animating it by giving it a name. As a matter of fact, in the US, we have October 2nd, National Name Your Car Day. You may not have celebrated that yet, but now you can put that on your calendar and know that you too can be an animist and make your car into a car people. There you have it. Of course, we know this to be true. We just don't put two and two together sometimes. Who doesn't think, oh, so cute, and we will give this a cute little puppy a name and a personality, and begin to assume things about it in a very animist sort of way. Oh, cute little mouse. Of course, we're going to give that cute little mouse with the cute little face, the cute little eyes. We're going to give it a name. We're going to start assuming a personality and that it has particular kinds of thoughts. We're going to stop treating it as an other. And that's the secret and the center of understanding animism. We all, after all, have a very great propensity to see faces in everything. We see faces in burned toast. We see faces on flour tacos. We see faces on the bottom of green peppers. We see faces everywhere. We are giving some kind of understanding of an animistic nature to stop making this an object and make it a subject instead. Of course, kids' movies would be nothing if they didn't animate all kinds of objects. Beauty and the Beast is all about how all the furniture and the silverware and the teapots, etc., and of course Lumiere come to life, dance around, have personalities, and interact with human beings in the world. And of course, everyone who's been around kids know that this is an absolute propensity in children to do, but actually adults don't grow up and stop doing it. We just suppress it in some ways if we aren't animists. As a matter of fact, I mean, you can, get a PhD in design in which you'll talk about emotional design, why we love or hate everyday things. And why do we hate or love them? Often it is about turning that object into something that we would consider beautiful, or that we would somehow give human characteristics or the characteristics of living things. So emotional design, it's a thing. And of course, we all know that we yell at our computers. Computers don't hear a thing, of course, and they are not frightened, and they don't get better because you yell at them. But can we stop that? Probably not. We do talk to objects all the time. And that is Bruno de Latour's point that actually we are all animists. We just have to think about it a little bit in order to understand how that works. Druids, do they worship trees? No, actually, they don't. They're animists who think that they learn things from oak trees specifically, and they are going to respect them as living things that have wisdom, but they don't in any Christian way worship them. And that's one of the problems with understanding animism, is not putting the Christian idea of worship, soul, sacred, holy, etc., onto the thinking of people from other time periods in other places who have not experienced specific doctrines of monotheism. Nature is my religion and the earth is my temple. This is a very pantheist idea, pantheist, meaning that God is everywhere. Again, animists don't see all of this as God, but rather somehow animated with consciousness and not being an object. But it is a different way of thinking that actually is becoming more and more widespread in the Western world as the monotheisms lose their strength. And of course, Albert Einstein did think in this way. He was a great admirer of Spinoza, who began the idea of deism. And he said, I am fascinated by Spinoza's pantheism, but I admire even more his contribution to modern thought because he is the first philosopher to deal with the soul and body as one and not two separate things. Again, Einstein is incisive in seeing that the idea of the soul is probably the problem with the Christian or Western idea of understanding how the universe is all one. You may or may not know that Niels Bohr, one of the uncertainty principle inventors in the early 20th century, remade his family crest, and it had a yin and yang symbol on it. And the saying in Latin is contraria sunt complementia, which is that all the contraries are complementary. Everything is one, hot, cold, dark light, et cetera, et cetera. It all goes into the same matrix that makes up our reality. And that's the way that he was thinking about that. This is actually very old. Even in the Western world, Chrysippus, one of the founders of Stoicism, 279 to around 206 BCE, Chrysippus said the universe itself is God and the universal outpouring of its soul. So the idea of pantheism and animism has been around a long time. It was rooted out in the Western mind in the early ideas of Christianity and the idea of a transcendent monotheistic God who had human characteristics and had to be obeyed in these particular ways. But it's a very old idea, even in the Western world. Well, thanks a lot for listening in today. You can help us out by going to firstunitarian.org/donate. And of course, listen for Bibles and Beer. We'll be on at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time Wednesday night, and we will be considering the idea of Samson. Thanks a lot, and we will be talking again tomorrow. Thank you.